The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, it's great to be back in Parliament as part of John Key's team that is implementing its ambitious program for New Zealand. Today's speech from the Prime Minister said it all. New Zealand is going well. We've got a plan to keep New Zealand moving forward, and we're getting on and delivering the things that we got such a strong mandate to deliver on in September. Mr Speaker, a quick rebuttal to a couple of the comments. Disappointment. I live in hope that one day we'll have a Green Party in Parliament that actually is concerned about improving our environment. Change of leadership, I note, well overdue, but I just hear the same old, same old. And I also have to note, Mr Speaker, there's going to be a by-election in Northland. And I read on the wires that Mr Peters is going to be having a crack. And he's been saying this is the opportunity for Northland to get help on its way. Well, let me just put the facts of the record straight. Because the way that MMP works is that if Mr Peter does stand in Northland, and I've got far more faith in the good sense of the people of that region than to elect that has been, but if they do elect him, guess where help is on its way from? It's from Invercargill. Because what would happen would be that if the people of Northland voted for Winston Peters, they would elect to Parliament Ms Ria Bond, the next New Zealand First member on the list from Invercargill. Now, I know there are some unusual Winston speak, but I don't think the people of Northland will be voting for a new Member of Parliament from Invercargill who's got a great Member of Parliament in Sarah Dowie. Mr Speaker, the focus of my contribution in the Prime Minister's statement is our environment and housing program this year. But first, can I rebut the litany of negativity we have from members of the opposition this afternoon? You see, New Zealand is doing well and members opposite hate it. In fact, Mr Speaker, I cannot recall a time in my 25 years as a member of this House that New Zealand's vital economic statistics are in such good shape. Let's have a look. Economic growth, 3% per year, projected by Treasury another 3 next year, another 3 the year later. Cost of living was running at 5% when we became government. New Zealanders were going backwards in their standard of living. Inflation under 1%, the lowest in the 25 years that I have been a member of this House. The member from New Zealand First has got the cheek to mention interest rates. Well, as Housing Minister, I've got an interest in that. Do you know that interest rates are at the lowest level that they have been for 40 years? In fact, I saw an ad in the paper that you can get a home first mortgage at 5.4%, and the last time you could do that was in 1967 when I was in nappies. Mr Speaker, I look at job growth. 80,000 new jobs in the last year. I say that is something of which we should be proud. I have a simple message for the whingers opposite, and that is, tell me a country right now that's doing better than New Zealand. Tell me a country right now that's doing better than God's own here in New Zealand. Kiwis know it. Kiwis know it. I'll tell you why Kiwis know it. Do you know that in the last quarter of 2014, for the first time in 25 years, more New Zealanders left Australia to live here than the other way around? Now, people voting for their feet with confidence in the program of this government. Mr Speaker, those growth challenges I've spoke of in jobs, in terms of the number of people living in New Zealand, brings with it growing pains. And housing is one of those that I want to talk about. This government is on the case with a comprehensive and considered program of reforms to increase both the supply and the affordability of housing. Now here's a clue for you, Mr Cunliffe. If we look at the Productivity Commission report, what did it say was the biggest increase in the price of housing? The price of sections. They in fact said the price of a section since 2000 has gone up from $100,000 a section in Auckland to $300,000. That's an increase of 300%. But if you look in terms of the price of the building, that's actually gone up by half than that. Another way is the fact that where a house used to be made up of 40% being the section price, today in Auckland that is 60%. And if we look at the report that's come out from Motu this year, the report from Master Builders, all of them say the core issue is dealing with the issue of land supply. And so I am aghast when I hear members like the Leader of the Opposition saying, what's the RMA got to do with the issue of housing affordability? Well, let me tell them. What is the law that governs the creation of sections and land price? It is the Resource Management Act. And I say to this Parliament, if there is a member in this House that is seriously concerned about housing affordability, knowing that the biggest increase has been in the section price, you need to look at the law that governs the development of sections, and that is the RMA. And that is the RMA. And when I hear the Leader of the Opposition and other members in this House steadfastly refusing to consider change to that Act, I say they are the enemy of the young family that aspires to own their own home. Mr Speaker, let me just give a simple example. A 29-hectare block of land, unimproved in Auckland, 29 hectares, going from a value of $890,000 in 1998 to $115 million, $115 million since, solely because of the metropolitan urban limit that has put a rigid barrier around the growth of Auckland that has enabled that landowner to make over $100 million, over $100 million at the expense of young families that want to aspire to own their own home, and members opposite refuse to deal with the regulatory issues that are at the heart of that issue. Now, members opposite just interrupted. He says, how many houses? Well, let me tell you about the number of houses. When we came to government in November of 2008, 1,000 houses were being built per month. Do you know how many houses last year were built? 2,000 houses per month. 24,000 houses. Residential building investment in 2014 was $10 billion. That is the most that this country has ever invested in residential housing in both dollar terms and in real terms, and shows the progress that we are making as a government. Now, Mr Speaker, I say, the member says it's not enough. We need to do more. We agree. And that's why on the 1st of April, Mr Speaker, we are introducing the most generous support for first homeowners since the days of the state advances loans and the days when you could capitalise your family benefit. That program worth $430 million, the biggest new expenditure that this Parliament and this government has planned, is going to help 90,000 New Zealanders with a grant for them to be able to pull together a deposit and to own their own home. And when members opposite say, what's the government doing? I say actually investing $430 million and helping 90,000 young modest income families get their first home is the sort of program that we need to pull forward. Mr Speaker, there are changes that we're doing around the Building Act. There are changes that we're making. Do you know, Mr Speaker, last year more apprentices in the building industry were supported by this government ever in the history of New Zealand. I originally put in my speech that there were 5,000 extra new apprentices last year. I just had a phone call message through. Actually, they had a record month in December, and the number is in fact 5,500. Another step that we are taking in terms of growing that industry. So, Mr Speaker, I say yes, I'm looking forward to bringing resource management reform to this House. I suspect it will be one of the bigger bills that comes before the Parliament this year. And it will be a litmus test as to whether members opposite are full of noise or whether they're serious about addressing the long-term affordability issues of Kiwi families and whether this Parliament is prepared to give Kiwis a fair go in being able to own their own home.
Mr Speaker.
I call Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker, and welcome.